everyone. We're excited to have DP Lyle with us tonight to talk about our anthology and the story that he's written for it called Red Roses, for our Rough Country Anthology to benefit the U.S. Marshals Survivors group. So thanks for joining us today. This is going to be a lot of fun.
I think so. Well, it was interesting when Ravis Wortham contacted me and said, we're doing this anthology and it's for the U.S. Marshals Service Survivors Benefit Fund, and would you contribute a story? I said, sure. Why wouldn't you? It's fantastic. So he said, all right, well, here are the rules. It's got to be in Texas. I said, okay. I did my cardiology training in Texas. I know Texas. And so he said it can be about anything. It can be any time frame, just so it's a fun story. And I said, all right, let me noodle on it and I'll get something to you. So I decided to set my story, Red Roses, in West Texas because, well, it's West Texas and there's not much out there. So I had pretty much free reign. And I decided to set it between Dallas and Abilene along a highway. So think James M. Cain, the postman and Double Indemnity and all that stuff. And I love those old dark noir stories. So I just created this little crossroads and put a little cafe, service station, garage thing there. And then this little 13-year-old girl who works there, her family owns it, and she is kind of the protagonist of the story. And so I started with that. I started with that kind of location and this little girl. And I said, well, what's going to happen? Let's see.
That's great. I love Rosalie, and I love her intuition that she's using throughout the story to kind of go, hold on, something's not quite right.
Right.
And she's so courageous and so intuitive. So was that part of your plan when you had her in mind at the beginning, or is that something you kind of discovered throughout the writing?
A little bit of both. I mean, I wanted her to be clever and smart, because you want your protagonist to be that way. But remember, this is set in 1955. People were a lot more naive back then and not as worldly. Her world was right there at that crossroads in that little place. And then, of course, school and church, because that's what you did there. But she lived in the middle of nowhere. So she was very precocious. She could fend for herself. And at 13, she even manned the stove sometimes, but she for sure pumped the gas and served the food and did all the other stuff because 13 in 1955 in the middle of nowhere, you got to be pretty self-sufficient. So it gave her the tools that when something happened that didn't smell right to her, she was feisty enough to say, wait a minute.
I love that idea. She's already prepped. She's primed, right, to watch the group. And to your point, it's like she knows her little world so well that when something happens that doesn't fit, maybe that's her key to recognizing something else is going on there.
Yeah, kids are very attuned like that. I mean, most people are, but kids particularly, because they, from, about the age 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever, they absorb knowledge so rapidly and so completely. Adults, things go by and they say, "Hody do," I didn't even see that happen. But kids notice stuff because they're absorbing information, and she is that way. She's very precocious, and she understands what's going on. And she, when the rhythm of her world changes, she senses that something's not right. And so, because she's pretty ballsy, if you will, she says, "I want to find out what's going on."
That's so great. I think that's what makes her so much fun is that, well, I don't care if nobody else cares. I'm going to figure out what's happening.
Exactly. We like characters like that.
We do. Yeah. So what inspired you to kind of center the narrative around her as a 13-year-old rather than someone who's seeing some obvious action? And in her case, instead, she's just kind of trusting her instincts at that point.
Well, obviously, the story revolves around another young girl and her plight, and so I figured that they would be on the same wavelength. I also, with her being a 13-year-old girl, made her more vulnerable than the other characters in the story, particularly the Texas Ranger, that they have a love affair, if you will. They love each other, and chide each other all the time. And the vulnerability of a 13-year-old girl in West Texas in 1955 was attractive for this character. and so it means when she solves the problem, we love her. We say, "Hey, you go, girl."
I can really identify with the setting of a garage out in the middle of nowhere. My wife's family, her grandpa ran a similar setup in Winnemucca, Nevada back in the 60s. And so this just really struck home with me. And I'm thinking about my mother-in-law and that age range. And I'm just thinking, okay, so I don't know if I could write a 13-year-old. How was that for you to write a character, that's 13 years old and a different gender? How did that all work for you?
Well, as far as the age is concerned, I mean, I actually one day a long, long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away was 13. I grew up in Alabama, and so the difference between Alabama and Texas is just how you make your barbecue. There's not that much difference. I grew up in Huntsville, which of course is now the largest city in the state of Alabama because of the space program and high tech. But back when I grew up, it was about 30,000 people. But you drive 10 minutes and you're in the middle of nowhere. You're out in farm country. Different farm country than West Texas, but still farm country, rural, little shop here, little store there, little service station there, this kind of thing. And then my dad was an accountant, among other things, but he was an accountant, and he had a lot of clients that were these small mom and pop grocery stores outside of Huntsville. Besides having clients in the city, he had clients out there. I think he did it so he could get the best hunting fields, to shoot dove. We loved to go dove hunting when I was a kid. So I was familiar with those kinds of stores and those kind of countryside settings, if you will, even though obviously the geography is different. I had a lot of female characters in my stories and in my thriller series and all that stuff. I had two sisters and a mom, and a lot of my friends are women, so I understand that. And I think people put too much weight on the difference between men and women. Are they there? You bet. Are they real? Beyond a shadow of a doubt. But the point is, at the end of the day, people are people. And so I think I think writers write cross gender all the time. And I think unless you get into some issues that are so gender specific that they become uncomfortable, that people are people. So I didn't have a problem. I didn't have a problem with being her. If you will, think Scout, and To Kill a Mockingbird. Scout and they have a lot and Rosalie have a lot in common. They're both precocious and they're both inquisitive. So, everything you read and everything you see informs your writing. So you learn along the way. So not that I had Scout in mind, but after I finished the first draft, I thought, she's pretty scoutish.
I love that. I think you're exactly right there with, it's more important to write good characters.
Yep.
And, the character and the person comes first. And that's what makes it interesting, and that's what makes it work. So
all stories have to be filtered through character.
Definitely.
Yeah. If they don't, they're flat. I mean, it's as simple as that. We love characters.
Yes.
We like to worry about them. We like to learn about them. We like to travel with them. Yes.
Well, I love the relationship between Rosalie and the other young girl that's there. It's really an emotional connection, and it's really hopeful, even though there are difficult and maybe grim things happening in the story as well. So how did you kind of balance that hopefulness with the sort of darker subject matter that's going on with the plot?
Yeah, well, I think you can probably get from that Rosalie was very close to her family, her mother and her father, and so her mom was her mentor, of course, and that's why she was in the kitchen with her mom, and she was serving the plates at the diner with her mom, and so she obviously had learned, like a gosling from the mother goose, and so now this girl comes in who is about her age chronologically, but not emotionally and not intellectually because of her history and particularly in her circumstance. And so I think Rosalie shifted over to the mother figure, the protector figure, the educator figure, and kind of led her into the path of salvation, if you will, even though I don't like that word, but you know what I'm saying. And so I think she basically went from this role to this role.
It's almost like she recognizes somewhat like characteristics of her past self, her younger self or her more naive self, and can see, I know where you are. I've been, in that state of mind.
And when her mother wanted to play mother and intervene, she basically said, "No, I've got this."
Yeah.
So that's a kind of a awakening moment and a maturing moment for her. It kind of changes her and probably changes her forever.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those moments.
That's amazing.
Did I think about any of this when I started the story? No. I just had a scene of a service station and a car pulling up and a young girl pumping gas in West Texas. And I said, "Oh, let's start there and see what happens."
I love it.
I had no
see
idea what was going to happen. Yeah.
See what they do when you let them run free, right?
Exactly. Run, Forrest.
Exactly. So then after you get through your draft,
mm-hmm.
how do you decide do you look at it and kind of say, okay, I noticed I kind of leaned into some themes or some plot points and I like those and I don't like these. How do you cut that back down to focus more into where you want the direction to be?
Well, it's kind of baked in the cake because as the story unfolds, I kind of get a feel for what it is. After you've been writing for 30 years, you can do that. But I remember the first 5 years, it was like, oh my God, Panicsville. I don't know what I'm doing. But after a while, you realize just trust your instincts and move on. But it's when you go through the rewrites that you start adding the layers of complication and you start adding the layers to the characters. I always tell students, I do a lot of teaching, I always tell students, write fast, and then go back and edit slow. Get the story told and then go back and fix it, because don't let the editing stifle the story. And the other thing is, I know writers that like in the novel length stuff, they will edit the first 3 chapters until they're perfect. And my question is, why? Because you don't know these people yet. You don't know how they think. You don't know how they act. You don't know how they talk. So why are you making the writing pretty? Who cares? Tell the story. By the time you get 50,000 words into a novel, now you know these people. So when you go back and read chapters 1, 2, and 3, it's like, well, she wouldn't do that. He wouldn't say that, because you know them. And you don't know them in the beginning. Well, I didn't know these characters at the beginning. I had a vague idea who Rosalie was and some of the other characters. I had to have the cop figure in there for the comic relief, because and also because he plays an integral part in the story later. But I wanted her to have that boyfriend girlfriend relationship with him, where they tease each other all the time, which is kind of like an uncle, that teases a kid. And I wanted that dynamic in there too.
I think that's so much fun. And like you said, the characters are what make it so fun. So how does writing a shorter story like this change for you compared to all the novels you've written when you're writing a longer format? Do you feel like you have to jump in sooner, or is there any kind of tricks you use to try to get into the story right away?
Not really. It's just that short stories are about one thing. They're about one event. They're about one thing that happens. Now, there may be multiple ramifications to it. There may be spinoffs, this and that, but you can't run wild. You can't go afield too far. A short story has to be about one thing. It's one problem that has to be resolved one way by one person. And so it's really like a little mini novel that will have a B story and a C story and all that stuff, and they intertwine. Uh, but really, it's an A story, and it's short, and it word for word, it takes a lot longer to write.
Mhm.
You know, a 5,000 word short story is not like 5,000 words in a novel. It takes much more attention to detail and much more pruning of the tree.
Every word has to earn its place, right?
Yep. Everything does.
In such a short format, I think you really brought in some amazing themes. I loved the idea of found family, how
Right.
she comes into the other family and is just accepted and brought in. We see so many blended families and different types of families these days. What brought you into that space, and what had you thinking of that for this character?
I think that's actually common in the South. That people who just bring people into their home, and you're part of the family now. Once you walk in the door, you're part of the family. Here, have some cornbread. It's that kind of thing. And I remember in high school, it was a guy that I was in high school with. I mean, who was a distance runner, and he was a dear friend. Well, about halfway through our senior year, his dad got transferred somewhere. I want to say out to the West Coast. But Terry didn't want to leave the high school. He wanted to graduate. So Dad said, sure, live with us. And so he did. He lived with us for the last 6 months. That was so common as to like, sure, of course. What other option is there? And I think that's common, that people pick up strays, if you will, as in this story. They just do. And because what else are you going to do? You're just going to say, here, walk down the street and see what happens to you? No, you're not going to do that. And that's kind of what this was, and they rescued this young girl and they took her in.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to give too much away.
They carefully.
But now I did, so there you go.
Well, it's definitely worth a read, even with the spoilers.
Exactly. Well, I hope so. I hope it's fun. I hope people fall in love with Rosalie and with all the other characters. I mean, and I love minor characters. I like other people that crop into stories. That's the one thing about short stories. You can't have too many minor characters. In novels, you can. And I always tell students, if you understand how minor characters work, watch Old Country for Old Men. There are so many minor characters in it that are so memorable that they make such an impression on you, even though they only got a few minutes of screen time. It's like, wow, what a great character when they disappear, or really disappear.
So what is it that brought you into writing? You've talked about, teaching a little bit, and you spent some time in Texas, you said, for cardiology training.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to connect all the dots here and see where all this came from.
Well, I like I said, I grew up in Alabama. I went to UAB in Birmingham for medical school internship, and then went off to Houston and did my internal medicine residency and cardiology fellowship at Texas Heart. And then I moved to Southern California, and I practiced here in Orange County until I retired almost 2 years ago for about 45 years. And so, but I always wanted to write. I always wanted to tell stories. I loved to read books from the time I was a kid, and I always loved the idea of producing a book. There was something special about books. Obviously, textbooks were part of my life, my whole life, but also novels and fictional stories. From the time I read Jules Verne's as a kid forward. A Journey to the Center of the Earth was the first real book that I read, but it blew me away. That, wow, you can go on these journeys in these books. So I always said that I would write one. I had stories in my head. But about, a little over 25 years ago, I said, when I retire, I'll write these stories. And I thought, well, retirement's not anywhere near in the future. So if not now, when? So I went to University of California, Irvine, to their extension center, took a couple of classes, joined a couple of writers groups, and just started writing. And, you find time for it. If you want to do it, you'll find time for it, I've been up since probably about 5:45 and edited about 20 chapters of this book that I'm working on throughout the day today, and then closed all that down about 15 minutes before we got on here.
So much fun. To kind of hear your background and all of that. So this short story specifically is in our Rough Country or Hard Country. It's in
Rough Country.
There's two anthologies.
Yeah, there's two.
They're mixed up. So yours is in Rough Country.
I think so.
And we're excited about that. What did that mean to you to be included in this anthology?
Oh, it was huge. I mean, I love Ravis Wortham. So if Ravis calls me, I say, oh yeah, whatever you want, let's do it. We'll sit down and have a whiskey and talk about it. You get your cowboy hat, and I'll get my cigar and we'll talk about it. But I love the guy. So whatever he asked, I said, sure, absolutely, I'd love to. And then when you couple the fact that it's a type of anthology and the location and the time period that I chose that I would love to write about. And then when you add in the U.S. Marshals Service, it's like, why wouldn't you do this? It's fun. It's fun. And I've been a big believer, if it ain't fun, don't do it. Go do something else. Because if you're not having fun with it, you're not where you're supposed to be.
Fair.
Yeah, and this was fun. I really enjoyed it, and I'm proud to be part of it. It's I think it's worthwhile.
Well, that's amazing. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you.
I always like to ask our authors, do you have a favorite book, or was there a book that kind of changed the trajectory of where you were headed in your life? Something that, really stood out for you?
Well, I mentioned Journey to the Center of the Earth. I think, I read a few books like, the guy wins football game, gets the girl, what we'd call YA now, but back then they were really stupid. And I'd finished football practice early, and I always walked downtown, which is like 4 blocks away, to the library to do homework. And I didn't have any homework to do, so it's one of those old Carnegie libraries, and went in there and sat, and then waiting on my dad. I had about 45 minutes to kill. When he got off work at the post office, he'd pick me up, we'd go home, and I started looking around. I said, well, there's books in here, and so I walked down the aisle and I found this Journey to the Center of the Earth. I said, well, that sounds clever. And I sat down and just started reading. And when Dad comes, he said, well, let's go. And I said, well, wait a minute. I got 800 pages more. And he said, well, you can take it with you. And I said, really? He said, it's a library. Of course you can. So I got my library card that minute. And I took that book home and devoured it. And then I read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that kind of started my love of story. So yeah. Libraries are big and books are big, and I always loved them, and that's what led me down this path. And I think most authors would tell you the same thing.
For me, it was Edgar Allan Poe. If you look above my finger right here, there's a volume of Edgar Allan Poe's stories right there.
Yeah.
So I can totally identify with that. I loved all of those things too.
Yeah. I was nominated for a couple of his awards. I love Edgar. Why wouldn't you? Yeah.
Well, thank you again so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
We've loved having you, and we're excited for this anthology to come out.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to the events in Fort Smith. We're actually going to go back there for all of that. And I think it'll be a hoot and a half, as they say.
I think it's going to be a great time. Well, thanks again for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks.